All right, everybody. Well, thank you for coming to our August garden talk. Weeds, what are they good for? I'm Jan Beglinger. I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator here in Genesee County. And today's presentation is by one of our newer Master Gardeners, Kate Fleury. And Kate's going to dive into the topic of weeds and probably a little bit different than what we're used to. So, Kate, go ahead.
Okay, is the sound coming through all right?
Muted, so you should be.
And, okay, let me just test here. Okay, good. Hi, I've been a Master Gardener for about 2 years, and I came here in this room to get my training, and it was a lot of fun. And I consider myself a beginner and an enthusiast. So as we talk about identification of weeds today, those of you that are more knowledgeable than myself, which is mostly everybody, please feel free to correct me because I did my best to identify things, but there are a lot of variations when you try to identify something, and you have to be quite knowledgeable, so I'm happy to be corrected. Also, at the end of our session, I brought some weeds for us to practice identifying. And one thing I found with getting my weeds ready for today is that they are used to bad soil. And of course, I put them in good potting soil because, and so some of them aren't doing too good because the soil's too good. So we'll start with the presentation, and then at the end you can come up and see the books that we have, and we can practice identifying, and hopefully it'll be fun. So what are weeds good for? They're not just ugly, they're something useful. And if you know what this weed is, go ahead and say, yep, this is the common milkweed. So what is a weed? Some people think it's an ugly plant. Many weeds are invasive. It could be poisonous, and it could be in the way. Most of us think of them that way. They can cause allergies and reactions, and it takes over, and so you just want to get rid of them. But what's the definition of a weed? Some people say a weed is a plant where you don't want it. But another definition is it's not valued where it is growing. It may have vigorous growth, and it may choke out other plants. So does that sound like what everybody thinks of as a weed pretty much? So I'm going to show some pictures of weeds without any identification. And if you know what they are, just say it. So what's this one with the red berries? Does anybody know this one? It grows in the ditch in front of my house. It's bittersweet nightshade. The berries are poisonous, so kids should not have that to play with. And then what's the one on the other side on the right? Yeah. And a lot of these mullein, M-U-L-L-E-I-N.
Make sure you repeat stuff so that the folks on Zoom can hear answers.
Okay, so on the left, the red berries, bittersweet nightshade, and then on the right, mullein, M-U-L-L-E-I-N. Now, a lot of these weeds have been used throughout history for various uses. Basically, we're not going to talk about any edible or medicinal uses today. Those are things you can look up on your own. You have to be very careful not to do the wrong things and misidentify. We have a lot of resources up here if you're interested in foraging or edible weeds or anything like that. But for today, we're just going to talk about which weeds do we have and what other things do they do for us besides what traditional uses have been. What's this one?
Poison ivy.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
So repeat what I said.
So This is poison ivy, and poison ivy is the great pretender. It masquerades in so many different forms. It can be a cute little sprout, but it typically will have 3 notched leaves. It can be green or red in the fall, like you see these red leaves here. It can be dull or glossy, and it spreads a lot by birds eating the seeds, and they poop them out, and then they show up all over the place. So the way I have learned to take it out for my yard, and I don't do a thorough job. My sister-in-law gets the shovel and she does a thorough job. I just get my double gloves on and put a bag over it and a trowel that's dedicated to this one plant. And then I take it out and throw it in the garbage carefully, and then the trowel I clean off with the bleach. So that's poison ivy. And then over on the side, you see these little round leaves. Anybody know what that is? It goes everywhere. Creeping Charlie. So, yeah, it goes everywhere, but that one's easy to take out. It's got stolons, those vines that they are very shallow in the soil. So it's the whole thing, it's really nice. So I never get mad. Okay, what's the one on the left? And just a general idea, we don't need to know which particular. It's some kind of thistle, bull thistle, probably. And then on the right, what's that thing? Crabgrass. Okay.
What's the name of the one on the left again?
Bull thistle or thistle, I just say, because I would have to work hard to make sure I have the correct identification. Bull, B-U-L-L.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. What's that?
Purple beef stripe.
It's not phlox, sorry. This is the ditch in front of my house. That's my house. So that's purple loose strife, and it was never there until this year. It just came out this year. I didn't, of course, plant it. It's just there. And we have an example of it here over on the table. So I'm not gonna try to take it out. It's a rental house and I don't have to. Now, this is very hard to see, especially up there, but can you tell what it is? Oh, good. Yeah. And that's in my neighbor's ditch, and they take it out with a bush hog every year, and it never goes away. Cattail, yes. And as we know, there are many traditional uses for cattails, but we aren't going to talk about those today. You can look it up yourself. What's this one?
Red clover.
Yep, it's red clover. And this one?
Wood sorrel.
Wood sorrel. And because the flowers are yellow, they call it yellow wood sorrel. And what about that? Yep.
What is it?
Plantain. T-A-I-N, plantain. That's my approach path to my house, and it's not all cleaned out. What's this one? Phragmites. What's we don't like about Phragmites? Yeah, so it's spelled P-H-R-A-G-M-I-T-E-S, and later I have the Latin name for you because I brought a specimen of Phragmites, and you'll see this now that you've seen it here. Now you'll see it everywhere. It has the spiky leaves on top, and it has this ugly sort of bedraggled seeds or whatever that is, that yellow part on the top. And it's everywhere along the highways. It likes the same kind of wet environment that cattails like. And on the highways, just everywhere. And both cattails and Phragmite can be invasive, so you can consider cattails a weed, even though we have heard it has a lot of different uses. What's that? Does anybody know that one? The lamb's quarters, and what's on the ground down here? Purslane. So this is the field next to my house. My landlady, she has 54 acres, and the field by my house was being farmed with the standard soybean, corn, wheat, soybean, corn, wheat every rotation every year. And my landlady decided she wanted to do hay this year for her animals, but it didn't get planted yet, and it's August. So this is what's there instead. And it's
The name of the last one?
Purslane, Purslane. So this is taking over the whole field. The dirt looks just like this, pink. So it's doing a function, but it is considered a weed. What's that one? You know, I think this is ragweed.
No.
No, curly dock. See, good, I want to be corrected. So it was supposed to be ragweed, so I'll get a picture of ragweed for next time. It's still a weed though. So what are weeds good for? A weed can support animals and plants, insects. So what kind of insect do you see on this purple weed? Yeah. And what kind of insect is on this little green weed? Yeah, what kind of caterpillar is that? Ooh, it's a monarch. I got lucky and got a picture because I haven't seen very many in 2 years. So those are asters, and I think it might be a milkweed, but it doesn't really look like it. It's probably something else. Oh, okay, good. It was just, I was so excited to see the caterpillar.
Yeah. What's the name of the one on the right?
Aster.
What's one on the left?
The one on the left is aster. The one on the right is milkweed. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
didn't hear the directions.
The purple flower is the aster. What's the button? The bee? There's-
Bee.
Oh, yeah, on the, towards the top, the dark center one has a bumblebee headed towards it.
Also, a lot of weeds are shelter for insects and other grubs and things that live under the weeds and the detritus, the dried stuff at the base of the plant. And I'm a pretty lazy gardener, so I don't clean my beds a whole lot and have beautiful clean dirt. And partly my excuse is that it's helping some of the animals to live under that. Yep. So another insect benefiting from the asters. It can be pretty, so it's nice to have pretty things around. It makes me relax, and nice colors, and if it's a weed, oh well. Some weeds are used as tools, and this is an example which I'll put on the table for later. This is teasel, or it's from a thistle type plant, and they used to use these to help comb cotton and clean some of the stuff out of the wool and cotton that they were going to use and make into clothes and thread. So it's not fun to do this. First, you have to take the thorns off the stem. And then you would kind of comb like this, like a comb, and take some of the stuff out that's in the wool when they shear the sheep. So I don't remember what this weed is on the left, but the clover's on the right. And one thing about the clover is it's a nitrogen fixer, so it can help restore the soil. Also, when you have any kind of plants and you dig them up and turn them under, like when you're making a new garden bed or something, you can enrich the soil. They call it green manure because you're taking the nutrients that were sequestered into the plant and putting them back into the soil directly. Weeds are very good at being opportunist and finding that bare dirt, and that helps prevent erosion when it's doing that. So it's annoying that all the weeds are growing in my ditch, but my ditch is not eroding away. It's well covered up with lots of plants. And weeds also, like many photosynthetic green plants, it will sequester carbon. So even if nothing else is going right with it, at least it's pulling some carbon out of the air. Now, this isn't technically a weed, but it's the best example I could find of a plant that can remove toxins. And so a lot of plants next to the roadside have picked up heavy metals from car exhaust. And so you don't want any plants that you harvest from there, like even sumac, which is by the side of the road, and some people use it for edible things. You don't want it from the side of the road because it probably has heavy metals in it. And so some farmers out near me in Hilton named the Greenwells, they always put sunflowers along the road of their fields. And I always wondered what that was for. And they go, well, isn't it pretty? Well, yeah, it's pretty, but why do you just put it along the edge like that? And then I thought recently that maybe they're doing that because of the heavy metals. Maybe it helps their crops not to collect. No, Jan?
I don't think so. I think they do it because it's pretty and it just edges their field in a pretty flower. But there are weeds that can remove toxins and they do use them in some brown zone areas. I just off the top of my head, I can't think. I want to say maybe the mustards, but there are a variety of different plants that will take up heavy metals and they can be removed from an area. But I think the sunflowers cater just because people like sunflowers.
Okay, I do have some articles in this red notebook at the end of the class on which weeds can remove toxins, and mustards is in there. It also can cool the local environment, so having the bare earth is going to absorb heat, and having the green helps it to not be bare and be cooler. And some weeds can show you what kind of soil you have. Some weeds show compacted soil because they're there. Some of them show different chemicals that are there. And you don't just go by one weed, but if area of weeds is sort of similar, then you would say, well, maybe there's too much of this or that. And I have that in those articles too. And this is similarly possibly not a weed, but it's at my house because my mother keeps giving it to me and I never take care of it, and it's still there. So it can be pretty and nice to make you feel relaxed. So what about weeds as food? We have used plants in many ways over the years. We don't recommend anything here. Anytime you are trying to identify a plant, you want to have at least 2 resources to try to figure it out. and it's better if you learn from a qualified person. I looked up before I came that there are many foraging courses. There's some through Cornell and there's many here locally in this area that if you wanted to take a course and get more familiar with what's good. Just for example, wild grapes, you know, they have a little cluster, a grape-like cluster, but pokeweed has a very similar looking dark berries, not in the same shape of cluster. You can tell if you look at them next to each other that they're not the same, but kids could get confused. So it's really important to pick the plants that you're really sure of and to know what you're doing. Of course, don't pick within close proximity to a road. And why wouldn't we want to take weeds to harvest from the side of a farm field? Yeah, chemicals. Contaminated water could be also contaminating the plant. Of course, we don't want to go on private land without permission, and we can't take it from states and federal parks. So being careful to know what poisonous plants are lookalikes for the plant you're interested in is really important. And you wouldn't want to use a plant for a medicinal use without talking to your doctor. It's really difficult to know what the strength is and how it's been preserved. And there's many things that can go wrong when you're trying to use a plant for a medicine. So if we're gonna identify a weed and know what's okay and what isn't, and we have our different resources that we're gonna use, do you see any similarities or differences in these two pictures? What weed would you really want to worry about and what one would you feel a little better about? So on the left, there's poison ivy, and on the right, do you know what that is? Grape, which is definitely a weed. I call it the kudzu of the north because it just kills trees and it's very hard to get rid of. And then I don't know if that's box elder or that's not poison ivy next to the poison ivy. That's something else, maybe maple.
I think it is a box elder, Kate,
Okay.
just from the leaf shape. But that's a good lookalike because people frequently think box elder is poison ivy. And another lookalike with poison ivy is the Virginia creeper plant. And actually, the grapevine does kind of look like poison ivy too, if you're not
Sure
familiar with
does.
it.
So the telltale of poison ivy that my mother taught me is the 3 leaves with the irregular notched edges, and always being aware that it can be glossy or dull, big or little, and it can be red or green. So it can have a lot of variations, but it's always got the 3 leaves and the notched irregular edges. So you see this grape is not irregular. Okay, there are apps that you can get on your phone to identify plants. They're fun. Some of them cost something. When I do that, the way mine works is I go to the place where it says identify on once you have your app open. And then you hit a button and it takes a picture. And then what it does is it puts it up on sort of the app or the internet where a lot of people have put in pictures that they've identified as whatever they think it was. So the AI or whatever is in the computer there will match up next to what you put in and see if it looks the same. But then you have to go through because there'll be a row of, we think it's this, or then the next row will say, we think it's this one, and the next row will identify it as this one. And then you have to look through and see what is really matching. So they're kind of fun, but they aren't simple, and it takes a few minutes to get used to how to use it, and then you still have to be sure what you're identifying.
Which one do you use, Kate, that does that?
Um,
Because I use the iNaturalist, and that one's through a college. I think it's University of California and oh, I forget who else, but that one seems a little bit more. It gives you an answer, but I still double check the answer. I mean, they do
Right.
learn.
the
And they're-
one I have here is PlantNet,
Okay,
so that's the one I've been looking at.
yeah, and iNaturalist is also free. I use the Seek version of that, SEEK. iNaturalist is free. It's, yeah, and it's probably one of the better ones. Again, that one's based on research-based knowledge, and I think it does learn. But again, I also double check things against, once I have a name, and sometimes they don't get down right to the common name, but at least you'll get to a genus. And then I do double check it unless I'm pretty sure.
Right.
But they are fun to use, and it's a good way to learn weeds if you are just out and about. Yeah, and you're not sure of something, or you see something new. And I know on the iNaturalist, you can also take a picture and then go back later and run the picture through iNaturalist. Sometimes it'll ID for you, sometimes it won't. But they are fun to play with. I agree.
So, I'm just gonna mention, some of the books that we brought. Most of them are books on foraging, so that's probably gonna mean those other uses.
If you want to show them, Kate, on the, you can just hold them up to the camera.
But I'd have to turn the camera on.
No. Oh, you're right, it's not. Sorry. Well, we can do that. Hang on, Zoom folks.
So while she's doing the hard stuff, I'll just talk about, the first one is called Weeds of North America by Dickinson and Royer. And this book is interesting because when I bought it for identification.
Are you pretty much done with your
Yeah,
program?
oh, that's the end.
Okay, because then we can do this.
What's interesting in this book, which is kind of a thick book, I thought it was just for identification, and it's really good for identification, but you know what it's for? It's for farmers to look at it and say, what is it in my field that's getting all over the place?
Here, tell you what, you talk and then I'll hold up there and I'm trying to
Well,
see here.
That's the one that, is different from these other ones.
Yeah. I'm just trying to, I don't know how well, because it's showing my background instead of you.
That's
I'm
okay.
not sure why.
But the other ones are just on foraging and how to identify plants that you might want to use for those other uses that we aren't talking about today.
Well, we're not talking about, I didn't mean to not let Kate talk about edible plants at all. But we do have, there's a certain amount of liability, so I don't want people just going out and foraging and then getting sick on stuff. So Kate is right. If you're foraging, you do need to have a good resource. And it is really nice to go out with somebody who knows what they're talking about, because we don't want anybody getting into poison hemlock when they think they're doing wild parsnip or something like that. So, and we never ID mushrooms for folks because that's too risky.
Too risky.
So, but if you're growing, and you can actually buy purslane seeds as a vegetable, so you can grow them in your vegetable garden and harvest your purslane from your own garden.
That's
You
the
know,
last
that's
one.
probably the best way to do it. Kate has a lot of foraging books. Now, I have a lot of weed books at my house, so I have a collection of weed manuals, because even from the 50s, weeds don't change their identity, so you can get old, you can get old resource guides and use them. So, Kate.
Is there any questions?
Yeah, do we have questions in the Zoom?
Before we do our practice.
The Zoom
thing.
folks, if you have questions, you can either throw it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And I'm gonna stop Kate's video again because she doesn't want to be on camera. And then I'll go back and monitor the chat.
Some asters, these weeds, aren't they flowers too?
Mhm.
They're
Yes.
both.
They're both. So you have to remember, weed is where you don't want it.
Yeah.
In my yard, the asters are welcome to go wherever they want. Because they also feed our migrating monarch butterflies because they're later in the season.
Okay.
So New England asters, New York asters. Most people would consider them wildflowers,
Yeah.
but if they're in your formal ornamental garden, you probably don't want them.
Thank you.